The champagne bottle never came. No admiral stood at the platform. No brass band played. When HMS Bellflower slid into the grey waters of Hartlepool Harbour in February 1941, only the tired cheers of shipyard workers marked her birth. She had taken 4 months to build, a miracle of desperate engineering. Her price tag read £90,000. A destroyer cost nearly $1 million. The Royal Navy called vessels like her cheap and expendable. The Germans would learn to call them something far worse. Lieutenant Commander Thomas Marsh stood on the dock and watched his new command settle into the water. She was 200 feet of riveted steel, armed with a single 4-inch gun, a few machine guns, and depth charges bolted to her stern. Her design came from a commercial whaler. Her hull was thin enough that a determined man could punch through it. Marsh had commanded destroyers at Dunkirk, had felt the thunder of real naval guns beneath his feet. Now the Admiralty had given him this. "Flower-class corvette, sir," said Sub-Lieutenant Danny Holt, appearing at his side. The young officer was 24, with the accent of Liverpool's docks and the eager eyes of someone who had not yet learned what war truly cost. Named after flowers. Bellflower, primrose, snapdragon. The Navy's little garden. Marsh said nothing. He walked up the gangway and stepped onto the deck of his new ship. The metal groaned beneath his boots. Somewhere below, engineers were still fitting equipment. The smell of fresh paint mixed with engine oil. Everything felt temporary, improvised, desperate. Chief Petty Officer William Brennan waited on the bridge. The men called him Chains because he had survived a sinking in the last war by clinging to an anchor chain for 6 hours. He was 45 years old, built like a barrel, and knew the Atlantic better than any chart. He handed Marsh a clipboard with the crew manifest. "Reservists, mostly," Chains said. "Some volunteers. Few regulars. The Navy sent us what they could spare." "What they didn't want," Marsh corrected. "Same thing these days, sir." Marsh studied the names. Fishermen from Scotland. Factory workers from Birmingham. A schoolteacher from Kent who had joined up after his brother died on a convoy. None of them had seen real combat. None of them understood what waited in the North Atlantic, where German U-boats hunted in wolf packs and merchant ships burned like torches against the black water. The war at sea had become a war of tonnage. Britain imported everything: food, fuel, weapons, raw materials. Without the convoys, the island would starve. Hitler knew this. His submarines slaughtered merchant shipping at a rate that kept the Admiralty awake at night. In 1940 alone, U-boats had sunk over 2 million tons of Allied vessels. The Royal Navy did not have enough destroyers to protect every convoy. So they built corvettes instead, small, cheap, and expendable. Holt found Marsh in his cabin that evening. The space was barely larger than a closet. A bunk, a desk, a single porthole looking out at the shipyard lights. "Orders came through, sir." Holt placed the papers on the desk. Convoy SC-42. 40 merchant ships. 3 corvettes for escort. No destroyers available. Marsh read the route. Halifax to Liverpool. 3,200 miles of open ocean. The convoy would pass through the mid-Atlantic Gap, the Black Pit, sailors called it, where land-based aircraft could not reach. U-boats owned those waters. 3 corvettes, Marsh said. Against how many submarines? Intelligence estimates at least 4 tracking the convoy already. Possibly more forming up. Marsh set down the papers. Through the porthole, he could see Bellflower's silhouette against the fading light. 160 tons of weapons and equipment. Crew of 85. Maximum speed of 16 knots if the engines held. Against submarines that could slip beneath the waves and strike without warning. That he thought of his wife, Eleanor, waiting in their cottage in Devon. He had written her a letter that morning, full of bitterness about his new assignment. Now he tore it up and started again. The convoy departed 5 days later. Bellflower took her position on the starboard flank, her Aztec operators listening for the sounds that meant death was near. The Aztec was primitive sonar, a pulse of sound sent into the water, waiting for echoes. It worked poorly in rough seas. It could not detect a submarine running on the surface. It gave false contacts more often than real ones. But it was all they had. Marsh stood on the bridge as England disappeared behind them. 40 merchant ships spread across miles of grey water. Oil tankers. Grain carriers. Ammunition ships that would turn into fireballs if a torpedo found them. His job was to keep them alive. Chains appeared beside him. The old sailor studied the horizon, where clouds were building into something dark and angry. "Storm coming," Chains said. "That's good. U-boats hate rough weather." "And after the storm?" Chains did not answer. He did not need to. They both knew what waited in the black pit. The wolves were gathering. Bellflower sailed toward them, a 90,000-pound ship built to be thrown away. Marsh gripped the bridge rail and made himself a promise that if his ship was expendable, he would make the Germans pay the price. The oil tanker died at 3 in the morning. One moment she was a dark shape against darker water. The next, a column of fire split the night and turned the Atlantic orange. Men screamed as they burned. The convoy scattered like startled animals, 40 ships breaking formation while somewhere beneath the waves, the wolves circled for another kill. Marsh gripped the bridge rail and forced himself to watch. The tanker was the Empire Dorado, 12,000 tons, carrying enough fuel to keep RAF bombers flying for a month. Her crew of 43 was already dead. Nothing could survive that inferno. The instinct to help, to lower boats, to save someone, he crushed it. Chains had warned him during training. The U-boats want you to stop. They torpedo a ship and wait for the escorts to gather around the wreckage. Then they fire again. Aztec contact. Holt's voice cracked through the speaking tube from below. Bearing 045, range 800 yards. Moving fast. The U-boat was already repositioning for another shot. Marsh made his decision in the space between heartbeats. All ahead full. Come to bearing 045. Bellflower surged forward. Her engines were Scotch marine boilers, designed for whale catchers, never meant for combat. They screamed in protest as she pushed toward 16 knots. The deck vibrated beneath Marsh's feet. Spray exploded over the bow. The Aztec operators worked in a cramped compartment below the waterline, pressing headphones against their ears, listening for the ping echo that meant a submarine was near. The technology was barely a decade old. It could not see through thermal layers in the water. It lost contact when the target went deep. It produced false echoes from schools of fish, from wrecks on the ocean floor, from nothing at all. Trusting it was an act of faith. Holt had that faith. He had spent months training on the equipment, learning its moods like a difficult instrument. Now he tracked the contact through the darkness, calling out bearings and ranges while Bellflower charged toward a target no one could see. Contact fading, he's diving. Depth estimate 150 feet and descending. A Type 7 U-boat could dive to over 700 feet. Once it went deep enough, Aztec lost it completely. Marsh had seconds to act. Depth charge pattern, set for 100 feet. Stand by to fire. The depth charges sat in racks at Bellflower's stern, steel canisters packed with 300 pounds of Torpex explosive. The crew had 14 of them. Each attack run used 5. No resupply until Liverpool. Marsh was spending ammunition he could not afford on a contact that might be nothing, but Holt had said the contact was real. Marsh chose to believe him. Fire pattern. The charges rolled off the stern and splashed into Bellflower's wake. The crew counted seconds. At 100 feet, the pressure triggers would activate. The explosions lifted the ocean. White columns of water burst upward, turning the sea into a chaos of foam and pressure waves. Bellflower shuddered as the shock waves reached her hull. The noise was deafening, a series of thunderclaps that rolled across the water and echoed off the low clouds. Silence followed. The crew stared at the disturbed water. Nothing rose. No oil. No debris. No bodies. Lost contact, Holt reported. Searching. They had missed. The U-boat had escaped into the deep, would resurface miles away, would hunt again tomorrow night. Marsh felt the weight of those 5 depth charges, a third of his ammunition gone on empty water. Around him, the convoy was still burning. Empire Dorado had broken in half, her bow section sinking while the stern continued to blaze. In the distance, another torpedo struck home. A freighter carrying tanks for the British Army in Egypt went down in 8 minutes. 4 more nights followed. 4 more attacks. The Wolf Pack was at least 6 boats strong, coordinating through radio signals that Allied codebreakers could detect but not yet read. They struck in darkness, fired from the surface where Aztec could not find them, then vanished before the escorts could respond. Bellflower's sister corvette Primrose took a torpedo on the 3rd night. Marsh watched her list and founder, watched her crew abandon ship into water cold enough to kill a man in minutes. They saved 31 sailors. They lost 54, but they also found their rhythm. Holt learned to read the Aztec through exhaustion, to sense the difference between false echoes and real threats. Chains drove the crew beyond what they thought possible. Marsh stopped thinking about destroyers and started thinking like a corvette captain, small, fast, aggressive. On the 5th night, they killed their first U-boat. A perfect attack run, depth charges detonating directly above the submarine's hull. Oil and debris rose to the surface. A German life jacket floated among the wreckage. No one cheered. They were too tired. Too haunted by the ships they had failed to save. Bellflower sailed into Liverpool harbor with 32 merchant ships behind her, 8 lost to the wolves, Marsh wrote to Eleanor that night. The old letter, full of bitterness about his assignment, seemed like something from another life. Now he wrote 3 simple words: I was wrong. His cheap ship could kill. 2 years had passed since Bellflower's first kill. 2 years of convoys, of burning ships, of bodies in the water. The Battle of the Atlantic had become a war of attrition measured in tonnage and lives. Both sides were bleeding. Neither side would stop. Marsh no longer looked in mirrors. The face that stared back was not the destroyer captain who had felt insulted by his assignment. That man had died somewhere in the black pit, replaced by something harder and colder. He had 11 U-boat kills painted on Bellflower's bridge now. The Navy called him an ace skipper. He called himself tired. Spring 1943 brought the crisis everyone had feared. German Admiral Donitz had assembled the largest wolf pack of the war, 18 submarines designated Group Lowenherz, Lion's Heart, hunting in the mid-Atlantic Gap. Their target was convoy HX-231. 53 merchant ships. 2 destroyers and 7 corvettes for escort. The math did not work. Everyone knew it. Bellflower had been refitted in Liverpool with a new weapon, the Hedgehog mortar. Instead of dropping depth charges behind the ship after passing over a contact, the Hedgehog fired 24 small bombs ahead of the vessel, creating a pattern that exploded on contact. No more guessing depths. No more losing the submarine in your own wake. Hit the target and it died. The weapon had never been tested in combat. Marsh would be the first. Holt met him on the bridge before departure. The young sub-lieutenant had changed more than Marsh. The eager eyes were gone, replaced by something flat and professional. He tracked U-boats with mechanical precision now, no longer flinching at the explosions, no longer looking away from the oil slicks that marked their kills. I've submitted a transfer request, Holt said. Coastal Command. Anything but convoys. Marsh understood. The Atlantic broke men. Some it killed quickly. Others it hollowed out from the inside, leaving shells that walked and spoke but no longer felt. One more convoy, Marsh said. Then I'll approve it. He did not know if he was being cruel or merciful. Perhaps there was no difference anymore. The first attack came on the 2nd night. 3 torpedoes, 3 hits. A grain ship, a tanker, a freighter carrying aircraft parts. The convoy's commodore ordered an emergency turn, but the wolves had them surrounded. Aztec contacts multiplied in every direction. The radio crackled with distress calls, with coordinates of sinkings, with the flat voices of captains reporting damage and casualties. Bellflower raced from contact to contact through the darkness. Her Hedgehog sat loaded and ready on the foredeck, but the U-boats stayed on the surface, firing their torpedoes from positions where sonar could not reach them. The Corvettes were fighting ghosts. On the third night, the submarine U-439 surfaced 300 yards off Bellflower's port beam. Her deck gun was already manned. The German commander had decided to fight it out, to destroy the escort that had been harassing his pack for 2 days. The gun duel lasted 11 minutes. Bellflower's single 4-inch weapon against the U-boat's 88mm cannon. Shells screamed through the darkness. Spray exploded across both vessels. Chains took shrapnel in his leg but kept directing the gun crews, bellowing orders while blood pooled around his boots. Bellflower's fifth shot struck U-439's conning tower. The submarine slewed sideways, her gun silent. Marsh ordered ramming speed, 16 knots, everything the old engines had. The Corvette's bow struck the U-boat just behind the conning tower, riding up over the pressure hull, crushing metal beneath her keel. U-439 went down with all hands. Bellflower pulled away with her bow crumpled and flooding. They limped through the fourth night with pumps running constantly and half the forward compartment sealed. The convoy had lost 14 ships. 3 more corvettes were damaged. The wolf pack showed no signs of withdrawing. Dawn brought a Aztec contact that felt different. Holt had learned to trust those instincts. This submarine was not running. She was stalking, positioning herself for a killing shot on an ammunition ship at the convoy's heart. Hedgehog range, Holt reported. 200 yards and closing. Marsh gave the order. The mortar fired with a sound like tearing canvas. 24 bombs arced forward, splashing into the water in an elliptical pattern. The crew held their breath. Hedgehogs only exploded on contact. Silence meant a miss. 2 explosions. Then 4 more. Then a rumbling detonation from deep beneath the surface as the submarine's hull collapsed. The new weapon worked up. By the time convoy HX-231 reached Liverpool, it had lost 18 ships. The escort had lost 2 corvettes. But Group Lowenhers had lost 9 submarines, the worst casualties a wolf pack had ever suffered. Intelligence would later confirm that the battle marked the turning point of the Atlantic War. Marsh did not feel victorious. He stood on Bellflower's damaged bridge and watched the surviving merchantmen file into harbor. So many empty spaces in the formation. So many names that would be added to the memorial rolls. Holt appeared beside him. He had not mentioned the transfer request again. Neither of them spoke. There was nothing to say. The war continued, and they were still alive to fight it. That would have to be enough. By autumn 1943, the hunters had become the hunted. Allied aircraft now covered the mid-Atlantic gap with long-range Liberator bombers. Radar could detect surfaced submarines from miles away. The codebreakers at Bletchley Park had cracked the German naval enigma, tracking U-boats as they left port and vectoring escorts to intercept them. The wolves were dying faster than Germany could replace them. Bellflower received new orders. No more convoy escort. The Admiralty wanted offensive operations, hunter-killer groups patrolling the Bay of Biscay, intercepting U-boats as they transited between French bases and the Atlantic hunting grounds. The cheap ships built to be thrown away were now leading the attack. The target was U-471, a Type VIC submarine credited with sinking 19 Allied vessels. Her captain, Captain Lieutenant Werner Hoffmann, was one of the last great U-boat aces, a holder of the Knight's Cross who had survived 3 years of the Atlantic War. Intelligence reported that U-471 was returning from patrol, damaged by aircraft attack, trying to reach the safety of Brest. Marsh read the intelligence file in his cabin. The list of U-471's victims included Primrose, the corvette that had sailed beside Bellflower on that first terrible convoy. Hoffmann had killed 54 of her crew while Marsh watched helplessly from half a mile away. This was personal now. After 3 years of war, Marsh finally had a name to put to the enemy. 3 corvettes intercepted U-471 off the Spanish coast on a gray October morning. The submarine was wounded, her deck gun destroyed, her port diesel damaged, her hull scarred by strafing attacks from coastal command aircraft. A healthy U-boat would have dived and disappeared. Hoffman could barely make 12 knots on the surface and could not stay submerged for more than an hour before his batteries failed, but he was not surrendering. The German drove his crippled boat westward, trying to reach deep water where he might lose his pursuers. Every hour he survived was another hour closer to rescue by German aircraft or surface vessels. Marsh understood the mathematics of the chase. Bellflower could make 16 knots. U-471 could make 12. In 4 hours, they would have her. But every minute gave Hoffman time to think, to plan, to find some trick that might save his crew. The hunt stretched through the morning and into the afternoon. Holt tracked the submarine with a patience that had cost him everything else, his youth, his hope, his ability to see German sailors as anything other than targets. Chains directed damage control parties from a chair on the bridge, his wounded leg still refusing to heal properly. The crew moved through their stations with the silent efficiency of men who had done this too many times. U-471 tried every trick. She released decoys, chemical canisters that created false sonar echoes. She changed depth constantly, trying to hide in thermal layers. She made sudden turns, hoping to shake the Aztec contact. Hoffman was good. He had survived this long for a reason, but he was fighting 3 corvettes with coordinated tactics and equipment that had not existed when the war began. Every move he made, Marsh anticipated. Every escape route, the corvettes blocked. The net tightened through the long afternoon while the Spanish coast grew closer and the Germans' options disappeared. At 1600 hours, U-471's batteries failed. She had no choice but to surface. The submarine broke through the waves with her bow pointed toward Bellflower. For one terrible moment, Marsh thought Hoffman meant to ram, a final gesture of defiance. But no. A white flag appeared on the conning tower. The hatch opened. German sailors began climbing onto the deck with their hands raised. Marsh ordered ceasefire. The battle was over. They pulled 23 survivors from the water. Hoffman came last, swimming despite a broken arm, refusing assistance until all his men were safe. When they hauled him onto Bellflower's deck, he looked at Marsh with eyes that held neither hatred nor fear. Just exhaustion. Just relief that the running was finally done. "You are the captain?" Hoffman asked in accented English. Marsh nodded. "A good hunt." "Clean." The German looked at Bellflower's scarred hull, her patched bow, her battered superstructure. "This is not a warship. This is a fishing boat with guns." "She cost 90,000 pounds, Marsh said. "Your submarine cost 2 million marks. Hoffman almost smiled. "And yet here we are." The prisoners went below. Bellflower turned toward Liverpool with her 11th kill confirmed and her war nearly finished. She was too damaged for further combat operations. The Admiralty had already scheduled her for scrapping. Marsh stood on the bridge as England appeared on the horizon. Chains joined him, leaning on a makeshift cane. Holt emerged from the Aztec compartment for the last time. They stood together in silence, 3 men who had survived something that should have killed them. The Flower-class corvettes would end the war with a remarkable record. 267 built for roughly 90,000 pounds each. They sank dozens of U-boats, as many as destroyers costing 10 times their price. They saved thousands of merchant sailors. They helped turn the tide of the Atlantic War when Britain's survival hung in the balance. History would remember the battleships and carriers. The corvettes would become footnotes, small ships doing small jobs, their names fading into the gray water of memory, but the men who sailed them would remember. The cheap ships. The expendable crews. The longest odds and the coldest nights. They had been told they were disposable, and they had answered by becoming the most effective submarine killers of the war. Bellflower entered Liverpool harbor as the sun set behind her. She would never sail again. But she had done enough, she had done more than enough.